I think it was about 28 years ago, I went and asked one of my Rabbeim for an important piece of advice. I was heading out into the world, and having left the warm, inclusive walls of the yeshiva, I was going into the city. And I wanted to see what I can do to at least retain some level of kedusha. And so he gave me a very, very strong piece of advice. He said I should go to the mikveh every day. That was his advice, mikveh. It meant getting up. I was going to the city. It meant getting up an extra 20 minutes, an extra half hour early. And I took his advice to heart, and I put it into practice, and I did it every day. One day maybe I missed, and I felt Ein Adoma. There's no comparison between the day that I went to the mikveh and the day that I missed. Yisra na'or min ha'choshech. I said, this resets and recalibrates and puts me right on the right track every day. And every day that I went, I felt like a new and a different person with a new mission. I'm not telling anybody what to do, but that's how it worked for me. We went around the calendar year, and then finally came Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we sat there a whole day, and of the Chamisha Inuim, the 5 things that we don't do on Yom Kippur is we don't go into the water, we don't go into the mikveh. So here we davened the whole yeshiva davening. We came like 20 minutes right before Ne'ilah. We took a break, 20 minutes. That's the whole day davening, standing in shul. We took a 20-minute break. In those 20 minutes, I went over to the Rabbi. He's going to daven Musaf. He davened Musaf, and now he's also going to daven Ne'ilah. And I whispered in his ear. I told him, I said, listen, I feel that I'm chasser. I feel I'm missing the mikveh today. I'm missing the mikveh. And he looked up at me with one of those looks that shout, like, what did I do wrong? And he said to me, he didn't raise his voice, but he said it in a very, very sharp way. He says, if you think that you need the mikveh today, then you don't understand what the whole day is about. Now here, Yom Kippur, it almost passed, and I don't know what the whole day is about. And I how could I not know what the whole day is about? We're davening, we're asking kapara, slich all day long, and I don't know what the day is about. And he tells me, he says, Mikveh Yisrael Hashem, right? The last mission in Masechtas Yom Kippur, it talks about, that quotes the pasuk from the Navi, says, Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. He says, you're toveling in Yud Kei Vav Kei. You're toveling in Hashem. You think you need the mikveh today? I remember that it shook me. And every Yom Kippur was different from that. Toveling in Yud Kei Vav, it's the greatest, it's the universal solvent. It's cleaning you, it's cleansing you, it's being matahir, it's purifying you. And you're toveling the whole day is the mikveh. The day itself is the mikveh. And then I was thinking years later, what about Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av also we don't go. And it occurred to me that we're toveling also. We're also immersing ourselves. We're immersing ourselves in an ocean of tears. Tears. The tears of Klal Yisrael, all the pain and all the sorrow of thousands of years is all focused on that day. And that's what we're toveling in that day. On Yom Kippur, on Tisha B'Av, is a mikveh of tears. Rabbi Shimshon Pinkus said it's very easy. He says a person comes to a wedding. It's hard to tell who's the mechutanim, who's the relatives, because everybody's dressed nicely and everybody's dancing. Forget about the gowns. We'll park that on the side for now. Maybe some people have a flower now to distinguish themselves, but as far as the generic dress, it's very hard to tell who's who. He said, when you come to Levaya, it's very easy to find out who the family is. Because there's the ones that are feeling the pain, there's the ones that are hurt the most. And on Tisha B'Av, we're all mishpacha, comes out. Recognize who's with, who's not. And the Jewish people are sitting in mourning. We're sitting on Tisha B'Av, and these are days of darkness. I remember a number of years ago, there was a young lady. She went with a father who was a doctor, Dr. Applebaum. And Dr. Applebaum, with his daughter, Nava, on the morning of the chuppah, they took the number 2 bus to the Western Wall, and there was an explosion. Father had dedicated his life to taking care of taking care of Arabs and taking care of Jews in Shari Tzedek Hospital, and she lost her life on the day of the chuppah. They came to the Levaya the next day, and her chassan took the ring that he intended to give her on that day, and he threw it into the kever, and he said, Hariyat Mukadeshes. He said, you are holy. This is the tears that we reserve and the feelings that we reserve for a special time called Tisha B'Av. So we're beginning to walk into those days, beginning to put our foot into those frigid waters. But before we mourn about what we lost, And maybe that's the purpose of going into the darkness, is to appreciate what it is that we have. The Nefesh HaChaim says that since the first day of history, there was a clarity. There's black and there's white. There was clarity. What's truth? What's false? What's emes? What's sheker? And then suddenly things become gray. And now there isn't anything that's so dark that doesn't have a little light in it. And there's nothing that's so light that has a little bit of darkness that's also to stain it. And that's a little bit the good news and the bad news. When we look at the world today, we become confused with our fleshy eyes. It's a very confusing world. The world looks very, very dark to our earthly eyes. And a person has to be a Navi not just to know what's going to happen in the future. A person has to be a Navi not to understand what happened in history. And to understand what happened today, we need a Navi. It's not so easy to understand what's going on, to understand news. So I was thinking that the greatest gift that a person can give to somebody is to show them what they have already. We can take an account together. What do we have before we go into Tisha B'Av? It's not the idea of just to indulge in sadness, but to appreciate where it is that we are and what it is that we have. I had a trip to Eretz Israel a number of years ago, and I was there for 1 week. Never forget that it was like 25 minutes to Shabbat, and I was ready to jump into a cab, and I had a few things with me, a few possessions, and I'm going to go stay by somebody for Shabbat. And I pulled over a cab, and I wanted to leave the cab driver. It was like a 10-minute drive, and I wanted to leave him time to get wherever it is that he had to go back. So this fellow pulls over, screeches over, and I see his head is all shaved off. He looks like he's caked in with 3 or 4 packs of cigarettes a day in his cab. Looked like he'd been through a few wars, a few milchamas. It was all, you could see the hardness, the toughness of the external shell. And I tell him, give him the address of where I'm going. He screeches away from the curb without a comment. And I make it my mission while I'm there to see if I can warm him up with a little conversation. And I know if it's going to be a 20-minute ride or a half-hour ride or an hour ride. So, I see how I can maybe open up the heart and develop some kind of relationship with this person. So I know I've only got a few minutes. So I ask him in my impoverished, how do we say, Mishnaic Hebrew, I ask him, Ma Shemcha, what's your name? And he looks at me, Uri. And he's already annoyed with the length of the conversation. That's it, it's finished already. He doesn't want to talk to me. Uri, what are you getting involved with me personally for? And so I said, Uri, Meifo ata Uri. He says, Yerushalayim. But when he says Yerushalayim, I feel like a little uptick. I can already almost hear in the background a swelling of pride, the music. Yerushalayim, Shilza. I could feel already something, the violins are warming up behind him when he says it. So I said to him, Uri, ata kamo dag. Uri, you are like a fish. Okay. He looks at me like, do you know what you say? Like he's ready to pull over the curb and throw me out of the cab. I tell him, ani tzarich lasbir. I have to explain. He told me, betach ata tzarich lasbir. Of course you have to explain, I tell him, adavar mufursam aladag, the most obvious thing about a fish, shehu gar b'mayim. He lives in the water. Aval hadag atzmo, but the fish himself, hu lo yedeh, shehu gar b'mayim. He doesn't know that he lives in the water. Lama, hu sham kol hazman. He's there the whole time. I said, Uri, ata gar b'Yushalayim. I said, ba'ati mi-America. Liot Paul, rak shvu echad, to be here for 1 week. $2,000. I spent $2,000. Uri, ata gar po kol hazman. You're here the whole time. Ashrecha. I'm jealous of you. Uri, you live here in Yerushalayim. Oh, Uri, I'm so jealous of you. By the time we got to our place, he gave me a tip. Baruch Hashem. He was so happy. Now we can laugh and we can chuckle at Uri, but we also, there's an Uri about each and every one of us. Uri. Share the berry. Tisha B'Av is that day of focused sadness. We understand? Klal Yisrael was detoured in the Midbar for 40 years because of the Bechia Shel Chinam, because of the empty tears on Tisha B'Av. That was Tisha B'Av. And a whole generation was lost in the Midbar. Bayis Rishon, the first temple, Bayis Sheni, was also destroyed. How about that? The Jews were expelled in 1290 from England. The decree came on Tisha B'Av. It's no mistake that in 1492, that the Abarbanel led 300,000 Jews out of Spain. on Tisha B'Av. But they were singing and they were dancing because they realized that HaKadosh Baruch Hu must be with us, that here we are again on that day. World War I was started. The fire was ignited on Tisha B'Av. And after that, Tisha B'Av, after that, World War I, that's what started the progress or the digression towards World War II, where we lost 1/3 of the Jewish people. Tisha B'Av, the fire was started on Tisha B'Av. So, Manaseh, Manadeber, what can we say? What can we do? Tisha B'Av. I remember I called up a friend of mine, a totally, absolute, 100% secular fellow that didn't read anything in Hebrew, ever in his whole life. He has no connection. I called him up. I happened to call him up the day after Tisha B'Av. And I said, what's up, Mike? And it just so happens he was in the business at that time of uprooting his family and moving from Osning and going to Utah for business. And he had his sight on a house in Utah, but he first had to sell his house in Osning in Westchester County. And as soon as I call him up to ask him, he starts to rant. And he starts to tell me the whole story that happened, that the guy who was supposed to buy the house in Westchester and Osning didn't really have any real intentions to buy it. And because he couldn't buy it, now he couldn't get to the house that he had in Utah. And the whole thing went tumbling backwards. The whole deal fell through on both sides. And he's going on, and in the middle of his diatribe, he stops himself and he says, pardon my lamentations. Okay, if you take a look in the English, the way the Bible writes it, they're called the book of Eicha is called Lamentations in English. He says, pardon my lamentations. Such a word he uses like that. My ears stood up right away. He says, but you don't understand. He says, yesterday I lost 2 houses. That's what he says to me. And the day before was Tisha B'Av. And I said to myself, wow, he doesn't even know what he's saying. It's like a bird came and stood by the window and whispered something to me. That yesterday we lost 2 houses. Look at the hashkacha pratis that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it, that everything should come out on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is a Yom Tov that comes out in Av. Karachim Av alabonim, the whole Yom Tov of Tisha B'Av, Karalai Moed, it makes sense to us because it's a smack, it's a patch, it's a hit that comes from our Father. If it's a meaningless hit, so we feel angry, we feel abused. But if it's a meaningful hit, then suddenly we understand that there's a message in that hit. Father doesn't hit his son Ba'achzarius with cruelty. So the whole month, the whole Chodesh is called Chodesh Av. I have a friend, Eli, lives in Eretz Israel. Wonderful, wonderful fella. When I went to visit him at his house, when he used to live in Muncie, and then he moved to Eretz Israel, and there he has that same picture on his wall when I come to his house. An amazing thing. He's got a picture, one of those old grandfather pictures on the wall, and his grandfather looks exactly like him, or he looks like his grandfather, I'm sorry. And you come into the house, and it looks like, one of these old, what do we say, ancient, antique-looking pictures, and it was colored in. It was a black and white picture that was colored in. And there's Eli, but it's his grandfather. I said, first thing I said, Eli, is that you? He said, no, that's my grandfather. He tells me the following story. When he was here sitting Shiva for his mother, he reaffirmed some of the details in the story to make sure I got it right. And what happened was, he went to a wedding maybe 33 years ago in West Hartford, Connecticut. And at the wedding, it was one of those weddings in a shul where they have a little bit like Shari Tova, they have a shul, and they have the hall downstairs, exactly like here. And so the wedding was taking place downstairs, and he went to the synagogue upstairs to see if he could find a kittel, right? A white kittel that we wear on Yom Kippur, that we wear at the Pesach Seder. I don't know what the minhag is over here. Person is buried in that kittel. And he went to go see if he could find a kittel. So a chassan also wears a kittel. In order they could do a special dance, I only know maybe 1 or 2 people in the room that might remember what this dance was, a special dance to be Misamech Chassan V'Kala. That's called the Techias HaMesim dance. It was an old vaudevillian routine where they have these guys running around like Keystone Cops, and there's some guy that's acting like he's drunk, like he's a bum, and finally they whack him, and they pull out some fake, pistols, and then he falls down, and they have a little minor funeral for him, and everybody's sobbing, and suddenly he just jumps up and starts running around. They start chasing him again, and the musicians knew how to play along with it. And the name of the dance, the shtick, was called the Tchias HaMesim dance. And so in order to dress it up a little bit, he went to the shul to see if he maybe opened a drawer and thought, oh, here's a kittel, we'll use it, and I'll put it back. Now there's the old gabbai, the fellow who's in charge of the shul, who's watching around. He's always watching out to make sure people don't leave their hand too long in the charity box, that they're putting in, that they're not taking out. There's always that fellow who's watching out. You're leaning back in the chair. You're going to break the legs of the chair, and the kid shouldn't play. He might be also the candy man. Also, they had this guy, an older fellow, old European fellow. And he says, I caught the thief red-handed. He catches my friend Eli. Friend Eli knows how to get along with people. He's mu'urivim abriot. He knows how to talk to people nicely. And he goes, And he says, no. He says, I came to get a kittel. He came to explain. But the fellow wasn't buying any excuses, like why are you opening up drawers and looking inside things, shtenders. He says, I came to get a kittel. He's a little skeptical still. My friend Eli says, I see that you're not from America. He says, where do you come? He asks him in Yiddish. And the fellow says, Hungary. He says, but no, where in Hungary? Which city? He says, my family's also from Hungary. He says, which city? And the fellow names a city. And he says, my family's also from that same city. So the fellow becomes curious. He asks my friend Eli, he says, what was your family's name? He says, Friedman. He says, my grandfather was David Friedman. He says, David Friedman? He says, you look just like him. He says, that's right. He says, I have a picture of him. I never saw him. He perished during the war. He says, you look exactly like him. Yeah. He says, he was an extremely wealthy man? He says, I heard. And he used to support, he was a charitable fellow, he used to support all the good causes. The mikveh, the yeshivas, the shul, everything was all done through his work, through his money. I heard about these things. He's a very important person. He used to sit in the front. Another person became ashen white, became like a ghost. He says, let me tell you something. He says, I'm probably the only survivor from that town. He says, I came back after the war to the shul, to the synagogue. He says, and everything was destroyed. I'm hoping maybe I'm going to find a shred, a piece of, a page from a siddur. He says, nothing was left. He says, the only thing was still standing, he says, was your grandfather's stender, his lectern in the front. I went over to it, and I opened it up, and the only thing that was in there was his white kittel. It was intact. He says, and I took his kittel, and in the displaced person camps, he says, I performed thousands of marriages to people who were rebuilding their lives. He says, with the chassan wearing your grandfather's kittel until it was threadbare, it was worn out, and I had to bury it with shemos. He says, and here you are coming to me. At that time, it was 30 some odd years later. He says his grandchild, looking exactly like him, and looking for a kittel to perform a mitzvah dance called Techiyat HaMesim. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. That sometimes something looks so tragic on a local level, but when we back up, we realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu never left us alone. Anochi imach b'tzara. I am with you in your pain. So as much as those were sitting on the floor, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was also in Galut. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also in exile. Not just us. He's sitting with us. He never left us alone. Afilu b'galut. And the fact that things happen and things are connected to Tisha B'Av is the biggest simon, is the biggest sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still with us during this time. That's what we have. That's the primary thing that we have. Another thing. When one of the songs that we sing, Piyutim, that we sing on Friday night, I don't know how many people, I don't know if it's part of the Seder on Friday nights that people are singing, but we sing, Ohave Hashem, people who are loving Hashem, Hamachakim bebinyan Ariel, who are longing for the base of Mikdash, Sisu v'simchu b'yom Shabbos Kodesh, who are rejoicing on Shabbos, a double rejoicing, Sisu v'simchu, two different types of rejoicing, from the outside, from the inside to the outside. Sisu v'simchu. Sisu, sason v'simcha. Sason is from the outside, some say. And simcha is from the inside, dressing up and feeling from the inside also, and connecting to the inside, from the inside out, from the outside in. Sisu v'simchu b'yom Shabbos Kodesh, k'makablim matanach liel, like somebody who received a great inheritance. Again, Ohavi Hashem, people are loving Hashem. Hamachakim bebinyan Ariel, who are hoping for the building of the base of Mikdash. Sisu v'simchu b'yom Shabbos Kodesh, have an extra flavor, an extra special taste, an enhanced flavor on Shabbos, like somebody who received, like won the lottery, received a big inheritance. So what's the connection between Ohavi Hashem, people loving Hashem, who are longing for the base of Mikdash, that they should be Sisu v'simcha b'yom Shabbos Kodesh, that they have this extra great flavor on Shabbos? So I was thinking like this. I remember once saw a story, and the story is, I'll try to tell the Reader's Digest version of the story. And that is that there was a fellow was in a shipwreck, and he was holding on to a board. And somehow he managed to make it to a desert island. And over there, he managed to put together his basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, basic survival, animalistic needs. But then other human needs started to cry within him. He wanted to, so, okay, am I going to be alone for the rest of my life? I'm going to be on this island by myself? He decided he's going to explore the island. And he climbed up to a mountain peak where he could look down, and he saw it looked like there was a village on the other side. Oh, so he traveled, and he traversed to that place. And there was a village. There was a city. And he opened up a door into a store. You could tell if people had been there. It looked like it was still fresh and alive. There wasn't cobwebs. It was, hello, hello. But nobody answers. Hello. He goes into another store. He gives a shout, hello, hello. But all he hears is the echo of his own voice. There's nobody around. What is this? What's going on over here? He knocks on the door of a house. He peeks his head in. Hello, hello. But there's nobody around. No people. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. He's sitting there and wondering, like, am I out of my mind? Is this real? Is this not real? And he puts his head down for a moment. And all of a sudden, he feels a hand on his shoulder. And someone says, hey, will you come to our house for Shabbos? And the streets are teeming with people. He says, yes, sure, I'll come to your house for Shabbos. He says, where's everybody come from? Where did everybody just come from now? And he says, what's going on? They said, no, we're too busy getting ready for Shabbos. And everybody asked. He said, they're too busy getting ready for Shabbos. Okay, so I'll wait for Shabbos. So Shabbos, everybody's ready. He comes into the shul. He's sitting next to somebody, and he hears like a choir, children and men singing. Oh, he never had such an uplifting Shabbos. He says, wow, this is unbelievable. He turns to the fellow on one side and he says, where was everybody during the week? Where have you been all this time? And they said, we don't talk about what we do during the weekday on Shabbos. Okay. He turns to the fellow on the other side. Maybe I'll try him. You always find somebody else. He asked them. The fellow said, no, we don't. He asked the fellow in front of him, we don't talk about on Shabbos what we do during the weekday. Okay, he's stuck. Okay, I'll enjoy the Shabbos. Went to the house Friday night. The food was memorable. The singing, the Zmiros was angelic, and the Divrei Torah was so clear, was so lucid, like he'd never heard Divrei Torah like that before in his life. He went to every meal. He went to the davening, but he couldn't get anybody to talk about where they were during the weekday. The whole town is gathered together in front of the rabbi in one place, and they're making Havdalah, and the Havdalah candle goes into the wine. Shh. And then now is going to be his opportunity to ask people. And as soon as the Havdalah candle goes into the wine, he's plunged into darkness. He lights a match and says, okay, hello. There's nobody around anymore. Everybody disappeared. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. What's going on over here? Suddenly a hand on his shoulder. The place is teeming with people. Would you come to our house for Shabbos? Where was everybody? I know. They don't talk about what they do. We're too busy getting ready for Shabbos. Come Shabbos, they don't talk about Friday, Motzi Shabbat. The Havdalah candle goes into the wine. Shh, he's plunged into darkness, and there he is alone again. Where does everybody go? What's going on over here? So he waits. Okay, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. He's looking out on the horizon where the Indians are going to come from. And all of a sudden he gives a big sneeze, or he's mafsik for 1 minute, for one moment, right? Shosha boim behesach hadas, right? Mashiach, Metziah, Akrav. Okay, so he misses it, and suddenly the streets are busy with people again. A hand on the shoulder. Yes, he didn't see where they come from. He missed it. Goes through the whole Shabbat. He's enjoying it. He's indulging himself. He's not going to worry because comes Motzi Shabbat. He's got a plan. The rabbi's there. The candle's about to tilt into the wine. He comes out of the crowd and he grabs the arm and he says, I'm not letting you go until you tell me, where do you people go? What's going on over here? And the legend is that the rabbi said, okay, I see you mean business, and I'm going to explain now. And the rabbi explains. He says that this town has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're an outpost in the sea. People stop on their way to and from Eretz Yisrael, and they're doing import and export. And we're an important, village in the seafaring world. But we were disconnected from Israel. But 3 times a year we would select special guests, and we would send them to Eretz Yisrael, loaded with gifts to represent the community. At a certain date, we'd send them off with a parade and with song. And then we'd wait for them to arrive at the appointed date, and they would come back and they would tell us stories, and they would fill the ears of the school children, and they would tell the people in shul, and we would live from Yom Tov to Yom Tov after we celebrated by ourselves, and we just about the miracles, about what it meant to to have a Beis HaMikdash. And that's how we lived for hundreds of years. We'd send off the people with fanfare, and we'd wait to receive them, also with great song and joy. He says, and that's what happened. And 1 year we sent the people off, and we waited for the day of arrival after the Yom Tov. And the whole day we're sitting there by the beach, and we see no sign of their arrival. Okay, it's not so predictable how people are going to travel by the sea, but the sun was setting. And then suddenly we see our ship, and we started playing the music. And the ship was coming closer, but we didn't get the signal that says, with the flags waving and the joyous response. It was one lone fella sitting there, silhouette. And the boat started coming closer to shore, and we went out and we pulled it in, and everybody gathered around and says, where's the other two people? They were riddling with questions. What's going on over here? Why the long face? What happened? Why you delayed? What's going on? What's going on? And everybody grew quiet because he wasn't talking. And when it got very, very quiet, he said the following words. It's very hard for me to say it also, I'll tell you the truth. He said, the Beis HaMikdash. Oh, and everybody got excited. He's going to tell us something about the Beis HaMikdash. But what was with the other guys? Shh, shh, shh. The Beis HaMikdash. He said, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Sreifas Beis Elokeinu, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And when he said that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, he says that when that news, that horrific news went like arrows into the hearts of the whole community. He says, and we fell on the ground and we were sobbing and we were sighing with such intense sadness. He says that our neshamas leapt out of our bodies and we died misa achas, we died one simultaneous death. And suddenly we find ourselves in front of the Kisei Adin, in front of on the other side, Machori Apargud. And they didn't know what to do with us. There was children, there was young people, they all came too soon, they came before their time. And they didn't know what to do with us. Maybe we can't keep them here because they didn't fulfill their mission in life yet. And we can't send them back because once they see on this side already, they know too much. So what do we do? And a pshara, a compromise was arrived at, and they decided that since we died because of our love for the Beis HaMikdash and our longing for the Beis HaMikdash, that we're going to live out our lives, we're going to send back, but only to live out our lives only on one day, only on Shabbat. Now you know where we are during the rest of the week. And if you let go of my hand and allow me to dip the candle into the wine, you'll think about where it is that you need to be, and you'll find yourself back there. He wakes up in a bed back in Eastern Europe with a throbbing head and some faint memory of a few Shabbases that he spent with people who live out their lives on Shabbos only because of their love for the Beis HaMikdash. It's a nice story. I think it has an important kernel of truth. And what is that point? That we know that everything that goes into Shabbat, everything that goes into what we don't do on Shabbat, to make the walls, to make the beautiful Kedusha of Shabbat, is coming from all the activities that go into making the Mishkan, Hashem's place. And the Torah tells us that we stop from building a Kadosh Baruch Hu's place, and there's a certain supremacy, a certain advantage to Hashem's time, which is called Shabbat, because that goes for all times and all places. So therefore, there's an advantage to Shabbat. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, you build my place, but when it comes time, when the Erev Shabbat, you stop at that point. Because maintaining the integrity and maintaining the Kedusha of my Zman, of my time, is more important than continuing to build my place. And that's the halacha. That's where we learn all the halachas of Shabbat from. And we know that the place where the Beis HaMikdash ultimately stood was called, by Avraham Avinu, Hashem Yireh. This is the place where people came to see Hashem. The Anei Ha'am, the eyes of the nation, the Chachamim, were in that place. So if we want to compare what the Beis HaMikdash was, people came 3 times a year for Riyas Panim, to be seen, and to see a Kadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachol. That was a place where people saw open nisim. The Beis HaMikdash was a place where a person could see Hashem. Where anybody who had any crack in his emunah, any doubt, that was the seminar that he went to, and he came back and he was certain. There was a certitude now. Because I saw it, I experienced it, I felt it. It was in a tangible world. I know it. I know it's true. I know it's real. That was the Beis HaMikdash. That's what the Beis HaMikdash meant to us. And Shabbos is like the rest of the senses. Now remember, one time my wife and we took a trip to Eretz Israel. We had 3 little boys with us at the time. The oldest one was 6. Next one was 4. The other little boy, 2 years old. And we went for 6 weeks in the summer to Eretz Israel. My wife, when she was in seminary, used to write and read letters for a blind lady. a Moroccan woman who she was blind from birth and her husband blind from birth, and they raised 3 sighted children in the modern city of Yerushalayim, right across from the Malon, Merkaz, right there in Yerushalayim. So my wife said, we're going to go see Yona, this lady, Yona Gil. I said, okay, but we prepped the kids before we went up to her apartment. She can't see. Don't get weirded out. She may not look directly at you. You know, we have to prepare them. We went up to her apartment. I remember it wasn't Shabbos, but I remember she felt on the wall. She turned on the light for us, even though she herself didn't need a light. I'll never forget that. And we sat down in front of her, and without touching anybody, and she says, oh, Zebalech, oh, that's your husband. And she started giving a reading on each of the children, an insight into each and every one. Oh, this one is like that. Now, she couldn't see who was in the room, but she felt who was in the room. And she was giving such an accurate reading that my wife and I were exchanging glances. How does she know these things? Where did she get this information from? It's so right. It's so real. It's so clear. It's unbelievable. And then we came back after we left down to street level. I remember the kids exhaled at that point. And my middle son, my second to youngest son at that time, said, he looked up at us and he said, so beautifully, he said, Ima, Abba, he says, that lady, she can't see with her eyes. He says, but she sure can see with her heart. And there's a phenomenon that sometimes when a person is blind, you know, a person can give up and go under the cover and say, I can't see, I'm stuck. You know, I'm a nebuch, I'm a miskain, I'm a sad case. Or a person can say, I want to participate in life in the full way. And when they have that desire to get the flavor of life and to feel what can be seen, so somehow the other senses, the other 4 senses are able to make up, and they're able to overcome and compensate, and sometimes even overcompensate, and they're able to perceive things that a sighted person cannot see because they're distracted by what they see. She was able to perceive things. And that's why we go back to this verse that we sing on Friday nights and we say, Ohavi Hashem, people are loving Hashem. Now when you love somebody, you want to see them. I remember visiting a businessman in Manhattan. And he tells me, he says, I'm going up to see my daughter in camp. She was away for 2 weeks. They make a big celebration to go up to visit somebody in camp. It's not like they're coming back from a tour of duty in Iraq or something like that. 2 weeks they were in camp. He says, I miss her. And he starts crying, and I'm handing him tissues. He says, I miss her. I want to see her. She's away for 2 weeks, and he's crying for his daughter. When you love somebody, you want to see them. You want to close the gap. You want to reduce the distance between you. Ohavi Hashem. Hamachakim bebinyan Ariel. People are hoping for the base of Migdash. They want to close the gap. They want to see a Kodesh Baruch Hu. But we can't see a Kodesh Baruch Hu because we haven't got a base of Migdash. We're blind. It's been taken away. We've been stricken blind. But we want to see a Kodesh Baruch Hu. We want to experience a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Sisu v'simchu b'yom Shabbos Kodesh. We get an extra flavor on Shabbos. K'mekabla mata nachliel, because the other senses come to the fore. And even though we can't see with our eyes, we can see with our heart. We can feel it. If we want to know what it's like not to have a base of Mikdash, to empathize, to understand our situation, what would life be without Shabbat, without the organizing principle, without the family principle, without the community principle of Shabbat, the Kedusha of Shabbat? We'd be in the jungle 7 days a week, listening to the news, watching the news. What would we do with our cell phones? Baruch Hashem, Kodesh Baruch Hu, Sisu, Sis, V'simcha, B'yom Shabbos Kodesh, K'mekabla mata nachliel. Kodesh Baruch Hu takes it out of our hands, takes the hammer, takes the worries away from us on that day. And we can be saved from the Chevle Mashiach. We have Shabbat. Rabbi said, we have Shabbat. Ashreinu, Matav Chokenu. We can't see a Kodesh Baruch Hu with our eyes, but we have Shabbat. We can see with our hearts. We can understand what we're missing. That's something else we have. Kodesh Baruch Hu is with us. And we have Shabbat. And now maybe one other thing, important thing. The Medrash says, when the Kodesh Baruch Hu cried out to Adam after the Chet, when things got confused, the Eitz Das Tov Ra, confusion of what's good and what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. So he called out to Adam Rishon, who was close at one point. And he said, Ayeka, where are you? can be sure Kadosh Baruch Hu had a GPS and knows exactly where he is. Right? My Waze knows where I am. Okay, most of the time. Sometimes it whacks out on me, but there's a satellite there, and it knows where I am. Kadosh Baruch Hu wasn't talking geopolitically where Adam was. Where is he? He was asking Adam for himself. Ayeka, where are you? You have to know where you are. Where do you find yourself? Ayeka. And the Medrash picks up on that word over there. It's the same osiot, the same letters that we say when we read the Medrash, we read Megillah. Eicha. How did it happen? And they connect the two ideas. It's a question that reverberates through the cosmos for all these generations. Adam, man, Ayeka, where are you? Eicha, how did you get to where you are? Baal Shem Tov says, wherever a person's thoughts are, that is where they are entirely. Lot's wife turns around, turns into a pillar of salt. She left her heart in San Francisco. And that's what happened to her. She should have been looking forward. But wherever a person's thought is, that is where they are entirely. Where are you? Where do we find ourselves? So there's one aspect of that message of trying to identify what are we doing with our minds? What are we doing with our thoughts? Where are we? But there's something else to appreciate. When Klal Yisrael came out of Mitzrayim, the pasuk says, "V'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael miMitzrayim." The Klal Yisrael came out armed. Mitzayanim, they came out. Mizayanim, they came out with weapons. Rashi says that Chazal tells us a very unusual language, right? Chamushim, armed. They could use other expressions, other words to describe that they came out like soldiers with arms. So the Chazal pick up on that and they tell us that the most modest estimate, it says Chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael Mitzrayim, they came out 1/5. So the whole Yetzias Mitzrayim, Leman Tizkor es Yom Seischem Eretz Mitzrayim, according to the most modest estimate, was 1/5 of the Jewish people. Right, 600,000 adult males between the ages of 20 and 60. Right. Then let's include now on the other side of the gender gap, on the other side of the mechitza, right? There's now another 600,000, okay, 1,200,000. You have people above 60, you have people below 20. You add up, let's say, at least minimally 3 million people. 3 million people, that means there were 12 million that were lost in Mitzrayim. What happened? When did they go away? So they would disappear during the plague of darkness. That's what the Chazal tell us. During the plague of darkness. So the Yetzias Mitzrayim was a tragedy. But at the same time, it was 1/5 of the Jewish people continued. Rabbi Victor Miller, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, I heard him say a number of years ago, he said not only were 1/5 of the people lost in the plague of darkness in Mitzrayim, he says, but in every generation, he says 1/5 of the Jewish people lost in the plague of darkness, whatever the darkness is, the plague of darkness is that generation. Communism, materialism, you name it. You add whatever the schism, whatever the ism is, that is what, yeah, and we end up with an 80-20 rule. You could look around the world today and take a look and see how many have the education, how many have the commitment, how many have the idealism, how many understand that are going to continue forward, and how many are going to melt into the sidewalk. Again, statistics only describe behavior ex post facto, but they don't proscribe behavior because we traffic going in both directions. V'hinei sulamutz of artza v'rosha magia shemaima v'malachei Elohim oli v'yardim bo. We have people going up, we have people going down, all at the same time. But the point is that there's 20% that continue, and there's 80% that are lost in every generation. Okay, we could look at our families, we could look at all around, and now we get to an important idea that just woke up in my mind this past year on Pesach. And the idea is like this. And I shared it with my kids at the Pesach Seder. I don't know if they appreciate it, so I have to repeat it and say it again. Somebody clever once told me, he said, anything worth saying is worth repeating. And then he said it again, anything worth saying is worth repeating. And the notion is like this. It just dawned on me. If we're sitting here at the Pesach Seder, if we're sitting over here on the border of Tisha B'Av, and we're committed to sit on the ground, and we have Shabbat, and we're recognizing the Hashgacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our lives, then we're from the 20% of the 20% of the 20% of the 20% of the survivors of those who survived brutal selection after selection, generation after generation for the last 3,700 years from Avram Avinu. Look at the price tag of the seat that we occupy now. Consider how much blood, Mesiras Nefesh, idealism, has gone into paying for the seat that we are sitting over here on the 1 yard line of human history. Because even the Chofetz Chaim said, and how much more so a few decades later, Jewish time is not a 4-year presidential cycle. Sometimes it's 20 years, sometimes it's 50 years, sometimes it's 100 years. Winston Churchill said, the wheels of history grind slowly but thoroughly. Look what happened to the Jews in Europe. In a generation year, look what's happening in Europe. But look at the seat that we occupy. Not just the tuition we pay for our kids to go to yeshiva, but the tuition from all the generations that people gave the commitment for Shabbat and the commitment for learning Torah. Torah Machzir and Alexandria Shalom. It's not a guilt trip. It's a reality check. We have to appreciate it. And sometimes somebody will put the ball down on 1 yard line because somebody gave them a wink and a nod from the stands, and they'll walk off. Only because it's a lack of appreciation of the value of the place that we occupy. Ayeka, where are we? We have to realize where we are. We have to realize the Mesiras Nefesh that went into providing for us and feeding us, that we should be sitting over here right on the 1 yard line. And that's when things get tough. Pardon the football analogy, I apologize, in case anybody doesn't understand football. But I figure we're in this galut long enough that anybody pretends that he doesn't know what I'm talking about knows exactly what I'm talking about also. We're right there. Right there in Arvei Moab. That's when the goal line stands. That's when all the resistance comes, right on the boundary of Kedusha. We're getting a big pushback. And the Chazal tells Lefum Tzara Agra, now's the time to get tough. Now's not the time to walk off. Now's not the time to be weak. Now's not the time to give up. Now's not the time to surrender. Even on Tisha B'Av when we're tired. Even on Tisha B'Av when we feel like we're lonely and we're lost and we're miyut shabamiyut in the world. We have to know what we have. We have to know who we are. We have to know the value of the seat that we occupy. Kodesh Baruch Hu, Anochi Imak B'tzar. Kodesh Baruch Hu is with us. Kodesh Baruch Hu is with us. Even after all these years, the Kodesh Baruch Hu is with us on Tisha B'Av, especially on Tisha B'Av. And we have Shabbat. And this year, Shabbat is pushing off Tisha B'Av. And we're going to drink wine, we're going to eat meat on Tisha B'Av because of the koyach of Shabbat. And we have these valuable seats. So while we're sitting and we're mourning on Tisha B'Av, sometimes the lights are low. They say Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. Maybe it means that Mashiach is really born on Tisha B'Av. I don't know. But from that darkness comes out a light that comes shining out. And the Zohar says there's no light like the light that comes from darkness. We're sitting over there and we feel lost and we feel lonely. And then we realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us. And we have a valuable place that we occupy in the universe. Mishachorav Beis HaMikdash, from the time that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Ein lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu el dalet amos shehalacha bilvad. The Rav was up here learning, Baruch Hashem, beautifully, halachot. People learning halachot. They're concerned about what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do. We haven't got a Beis HaMikdash, but we have people concerned about learning and maintaining the integrity of the Dalet Amot Shehalacha. So even though these are dark times and we look at the world and boy, we can get confused. Don't try to figure it out yourself. We look in the Torah, we have the Torah. That gives us that clarity, that gives us a picture. We have Shabbat. The person sits on Shabbat and suddenly the whole world disappears and we can understand. It saves us from the Chevlei Mashiach because Chevlei Mashiach, it's the confusion that comes along. When a woman is giving birth, she gets confused, you know. But if she understands, she has a pause, and she knows how to pause between the waves, the pressure, so then she can reset her mind. We can reset our mind also, Baruch Hashem, because we have Shabbos. And we have a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Look at that. With these ingredients that we discover, we find ourselves on Tisha B'Av, Bez Hashem, we can build everything back. And that's what we look forward to. That's a little bit of the light that we have to look forward to during these dark days. I thank everybody for coming tonight. And Bez Hashem, that it's not too late, that Bez Hashem, Mashiach is Nolad B'Tisha B'Av. We can find ourselves, Bez Hashem, B'mhera B'Yameinu, in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh.